We have Graeme Scott here from Telarus. He is the VP of Advanced Networking and Mobility for this episode of the Emmettson ROI Insights Podcast. Graeme and I had met at a Telarus Ascend event, which is one of their educational events to teach partners like myself about the new technologies, the whole landscape of the different technologies that are emerging today, and how we can talk about them with our clients to help them solve business outcomes. But before we jump into that, I just want to hand it over to Graeme to give himself a little bit more of an introduction and what his role is there and elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So great to be here, Daniel. Thanks so much for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Graeme Scott. I'm with Telarus. I'm the Vice President of Advanced Network, Mobility, and IoT. And essentially what that means is, anything that pertains to the network and extensions of the network. And that's really kind of how we see mobility and IoT in that regard. So what I'm responsible for is vendor strategy, so supplier strategy. I work with our supplier management team there, as well as partner enablement and education, which is what you were referencing when we talked about the Ascend event. And then, just general sales strategy and assisting partners close deals, along with our sales engineering team. We work together to make sure that our tech advisors or partners have access to information, tools, resources that they can use to help close business.
Yes, and I do highly recommend Telarus and their tools and Graeme and the educational events, as we'll get into here. I had no prior experience with IoT. I've been, availed to it. We've talked about it. I've heard about it. I've never been directly involved in speaking with clients about it or talking about it. But as a testament to those events and what Graeme and the team at Telarus are able to do, at that event, at Graeme's prompt, I send a text out to a client of mine and opened an opportunity on the spot, which closed just a couple weeks later. So if that's not, proof and testimony, I don't know what is. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way that it's structured. It's very professional. You sit down, it's very fun, it's very casual. It's not some stale, bland PowerPoint where you just sit there and it's a lot of conversation. There's role plays, hands-on, in the weeds, getting into it, getting involved. And I love that. It's not, here's a piece of paper, we're going to read off this for 3 hours. But also, I think the way that you present it yourself and the way you talk about it reflects a commonality throughout a lot of the other guests that I've had and their ability to convey complex information in simple terms that are easy to understand. So we can do so the same way in the same fashion to our clients. And we'll start with IoT there because that's the deal that I ended up working. And I think you put it so plainly, what is IoT? When I talk to like my wife about it and she's not in tech and she doesn't understand these things. And I'm we're like the Chandlers of the world, like friends, like, what does this guy do? And I'm like, all right, well, IoT, as you put it, it's the thing. And then there's the interface. So the thing is like a sensor or anything out in the field that is reading back information, something that you want to track. And then you have the interface is whatever you're reading that on, whether it be a tablet or a dashboard or an application. And then there's some sort of transport, which is the connectivity, right? And that could be any sort of internet connectivity. And that's how I actually opened up the conversation and the opportunity. I asked them, what do you guys track or what do you want to track? And it turns out this is a transportation and a trucking company. And to date, they did not have any sort of asset tracking on their trucks and trailers. And they thought actually it was going to be way more expensive than it turned out to be, actually 4 times more expensive. And what it gave them the ability to do, it solved several problems for them. So the deal was regarding GPS asset tracking for their trucks and trailers. It was a dash cam and it was engine diagnostics. So the dash cam came up in conversation because they had drivers that were reporting accidents or causing accidents. They didn't have any way to refute opposing viewpoints of the drivers who were saying, oh, I didn't do that. So they had no evidence of that whatsoever to be able to fight that in court. They had no ability to track the assets because they also loaned out some of these trailers and they didn't know who was taking them and where they were going. Are they going to competitors? They didn't have the ability to give real-time updates to clients and when these things are going to be delivered, or even seeing routing and say, hey, did we take the right path here? And then engine diagnostics, they have a tech back at the location that was doing, routine service. And sometimes you don't need to do that service. Sometimes you do need to do that service. Sometimes it's too late when you find out there's an issue, and then all of a sudden you've incurred damages. So they were able to do that proactively now. They can take a look at that and they can see issues before they happen. And these are the types of business problems that they solve rather than trying to sell a device. So I wanted to throw that out there and see if there's any other color you can add to maybe a situation in the realm of transportation that may come to mind in a scenario that you've run into.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on a couple of things there, obviously, right? So number one, as it pertains to IoT, every business tracks something, and really you just got to find out what that something is. There is information, we talked about the IoT solution. What is it? Well, the first part, and probably, well, I wouldn't say the primary part, but the first part certainly is something that's in the environment that is capturing information. So when you're talking to your clients, you really need to find out what that information is. What information are they trying to collect from their environment, from the field, as it were, and what do they do with that information? In this case, you're talking about fleet tracking, and it's things like GPS data, location, images of what's going on inside the vehicle. But there's other businesses out there. It could be number of people that are in a line, or people that congregate around a certain retail display, or certain times of the day when it's busier. There's all kinds of people tracking. There's all kinds of other assets. And like a hospital, for example, you could be tracking equipment and machinery. So again, every business tracks something. We just want to try and find out what that is. And the exercise you talked about where we send the text, it's pretty much just a simple thing. Hey, I'm at this event, learning about IoT. What kind of things are you guys tracking in the business? And just the results you get from just a simple text like that can be pretty powerful. I mean, I think what we sometimes forget is that our customers are grappling with some of the same challenges that we are in terms of understanding this stuff and how it fits. And they look to us to provide insight and guidance there. And so in this case, obviously, you brought a solution to them that they had probably heard of and probably thought about, but they had some misconceptions, right? It was too expensive. It was too hard to deploy. And, by kind of walking through what was going on there, you were able to determine a value. The customer had believed that there was value in the details and the data that solution provided, and match that up with something that they saw as affordable, leading to an acceptable ROI for them and something they move forward with. So I think that exercise, finding out what they track, finding out what that's worth to the business, and then looking for solutions that help meet that need is really what successful tech advisors do.
Yeah. And that wasn't even originally how I came into contact with that client. We were originally talking about other things. It was UCAS. We were talking about that, which they ended up not going with to prioritize this. So it turned out to be a total flip in terms of where they sent their budget, because they found much more value in something. He actually shook my hand, the owner, afterwards. He goes, "This was a long time coming. Thank you so much for contacting us, because I didn't even know this was possible for us." So it's really nice to see that. And that's why I love being in the position I am now as the sole proprietor. And you get that as an individual contributor, but you're not solely responsible for it. And I love this a lot more. And that's ongoing. And on top of that, I was able to help them out with other services. They do government bids. The other portion of my business is channel marketing. So I'm able to redo their 150-page RFP process documentation for digital PDFs and, interactive stuff like that. And this is something they can also add as an intangible value to their proposals and say, hey, we have the ability to prove liability. We have the ability to give such and such capabilities to increase their ability to win more business.
Yeah, and I think you touched on another important part there too. I mean, I say this at all the events, right? Businesses only care about two things: making money and saving money. And right there, you outlined a number of benefits that this solution had that they can tie directly to revenue generating opportunities. And I think that's a big part of it. Like, how do we take this money we're about to spend on this product, service, solution and create opportunity and revenue for the business by doing that? And I think your ability to do that is probably what led to the close in saying, hey, look, if we have this solution, if we have the information that this solution provides, that's going to create more opportunity for our business and thus deliver a return. And that's really what businesses care about.
Yeah, 100%. And actually bring me back, and I've referenced this 1,000 times. The viewers are probably tired of hearing it from me, but the Telarus Tech Trends report, I think it was number 4 out of 4. One of the priorities was cost cutting for the purpose of reinvestment into innovation. So now, of course, not immediately, but over time, they will start to see, hey, we didn't, have to wait for this transmission to fail or this engine to overheat or whatever it was. I'm not a transportation trucking guy, definitely not a mechanic by any means, but they'll be able to avoid issues that would have cost them money, or perhaps it was the accident that they can then reshuffle and put into a new initiative that will improve their business yet again. And that's the value of working with any advisor or managed service provider. So I'm happy to be able to do that. But before I continue ranting about myself and my own graces, I wanted to tail off and enter into one of the other sections of your title and your purpose, and actually talk about the transport section of that of the IoT, and specifically the LTE and mobility and connection. And we'll get into this in a broader sense. But I want to talk about 5G and what you think you're going to be seeing coming out, because it is limited now. It is definitely out there. It's not in full scale. And I've had conversations with some other folks, and we've danced around the topic of politics a little bit, and it's been very successful. We could do that no problem. But I have seen some new proposals and some new plans that are in the upcoming administration, and it appears that there is a prioritization to accelerate the 5G infrastructure. So I'm expecting over a pretty short period of time that that's going to start being rolled out. What's going to be the result of that? What's the change when 5G really starts to make its inroads and prevalence?
Yeah, I think you're talking about sort of network in general, and I think 5G is really just one element of a successful network strategy. And really, when you're talking politics, it's all about access, right? How do we get the most people the most access? And we know that if you do that, if you provide good internet, if you provide good connectivity in areas, then businesses thrive, right? And I think that's part of what's driving that. Now, when you talk about 5G specifically, the carriers almost did themselves a disservice by talking about it a lot before it was really here and before it was really ready. Well, it's ready now. I mean, you're starting to see some pretty strong results from service tests when you talk about 5G, cable-like speeds, broadband-like speeds available. And when you have something like 5G that can, is easy to deploy in a lot of areas and gives you good coverage, that's a great solution for getting in areas that are hard to reach. So I think the proliferation of 5G and even 4G and LTE before it is what's allowed some of these solutions like IoT type solutions to thrive. Thinking about the network of the future now, where we're going, those demands are even going to be more so over the next few years. I mean, who would have thought that even 5 years ago, the majority of activity being done in port is being done by automated robots, essentially, that are onloading and offloading cargo containers. And those things need to be connected to some kind of network so they can get their instructions. And how do you do that? Well, things like 5G and other solutions like that are really key in delivering that kind of connectivity. Some of the distribution centers that are out there, same thing. You've got automated robots and things like that going through the aisles. And those are not the things we would have thought of a number of years ago. And as those types of services are out there and needing connectivity, how we meet those needs changes. And I think what we had in the past, things like DSL, dial-up internet, just cannot meet the needs of those types of infrastructure and equipment. So you're starting to see a heavier reliance on things like 5G. And again, 5G is just really part of an overall pie of the network. There's a lot of different elements that go to it. But I think it's one that is going to continue to be very important for us as we move forward.
You were mentioning, just broadly speaking, that mobility and cellular connectivity being a viable and valid form of connectivity. You got to stop thinking about it as, mobility. It is a actual connectivity option. And I think you threw out some statistics about how many businesses are actually using it. I'm looking over here at my notes, and I think you did say 53% of telecom spend is expected to, that's what it is expected to be by 2027. And it's crazy to think about that because, today it's certainly not the case, maybe approaching in that direction. But also, I think 400 billion devices that are out there today or something like that, everything is connected. It's easy for an individual who maybe not be in tech even to understand this, because in our homes, we have Amazon Alexa, we have refrigerators that order milk for us. So they're connected to the
Right.
internet. Everything is. It's crazy.
Yeah. Now there's two trends we're seeing is 7 out of 10 new internet connections are wireless connections, meaning mobile connections. And anything that can go mobile will go mobile. I mean, that's become clear over the last several years. And I think, in the past, we thought of mobile devices and mobile phones as something kind of separate, distinct from the network. When in reality, we really have to think about it as an extension of the network. People want is a seamless experience, right? Where I can go to my office, I can use my computer or laptop or desktop. I can then move that desktop or laptop to a boardroom and have the same connectivity experience. I can then leave the office and go to a park. I have the same experience. I have the same access to the same resources that I had in the office. I can go home. I can put my laptop away and I can pick up my phone, and I'm still connected. I've still got access to all the same things I want. That idea that experience is seamless for our customers is where we're moving. And, to your point, we have to start thinking of mobile devices and mobility as just part of that equation rather than a separate computation.
Yeah, and I've seen in my conversations, meeting with suppliers and learning and educating myself. I'm holding here, this is the puck here from Infinite Wireless, who we're going to have on as well. I'm going through testing right now prior to having them on so I can speak intelligibly to
Great,
it. But
sir.
I'm very impressed with that there. And it's bringing me to some of the advancements in, just even in SIM cards and being able to be more agile with that, because it used to be you just had a physical SIM and you have to buy a device, then you're locked in. It's like, what if the footprint of the carrier rather isn't great in my region? Do I have to give them two phones and one of them's got one carrier, the other one? No, it's like now you have eSIMs, and then you can change that on in the back end portal. And then we'll get into the, CMO with the vSIMs, which is another generation of that entirely. But that's the type of stuff that has enabled the workforce that we have today to really operate in the way it does.
Absolutely. And that's, COVID, everybody that left the office environment. And although some people are coming back, a lot of the things we gained from COVID, we don't want to lose. And that is this ability to connect and work from anywhere. That is something that is not going to go backwards. In fact, it's going to continue to advance. It's about more access to the resources and the tools and all those things that I want, more access to bandwidth to facilitate all that. So I think that's the direction we're moving in. We're not going backwards. So again, anything that can go mobile will go mobile. And I think that's what people need to kind of get in line with, because it's happening.
Yeah, I think we've passed the point of no return in terms of technology. When I see on Instagram full movie trailers made entirely out of generative AI, I think we're
Yes.
beyond the point of being able to go
Whole
back to
nother
offices.
story.
Yeah. I don't want to hover around the AI conversation too much, because the fundamentals are still super important. Maybe we'll touch on it again a little bit later. But I did want to sort of break it out in your viewpoint, and I'll leave this as a broad question to some of the things that some of the use cases you're seeing most prevalent as one, and then most impactful, just in your opinion. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I was mentioning, the proliferation of wireless connectivity has created a whole lot of other scenarios, right? IoT and the solution that you sold is just one example of that. Because the connectivity available through that technology is so good and able to do so much, it's created a lot more opportunity. If you look at what's happening with network as a whole, traditional broadband, traditional wireline connections are starting to fade away. I mean, they're still an important part of any strategy. I don't want to, lead anyone to believe that those are not being deployed and not being sold, but they're certainly not being sold in the volume they were. And we're instead seeing a lot of wireless connections coming online, 7 out of 10 new connections. And what that means is that there's all sorts of different places and things that can connect to the internet that couldn't in the past. And that has created a whole lot more opportunities. Think about things like parking meters that were kind of off and you typically wouldn't build network infrastructure to a parking deck, for example. Well, now you can connect all of those spots and you can connect all those things by putting SIM cards in there, right? So that you can give updates on how many spots are available and green lights for spots that are open and red lights for spots that aren't. And all that information can be updated in real time and ready for customers to improve their experience. So that is one example. I mean, I think obviously the fleet tracking example is another one where the information that is available from those applications go far beyond what they were in the past. Of course, it used to just be, hey, where is my truck? Am I riding the most efficient routes? Well, now we can give real-time updates to customers. Let them know, hey, your driver is 15 minutes out. Like, think of your Uber experience now applying to your HVAC contractor, right? Where you know exactly how far away they are and they'll be there in 10 minutes for their appointment. So you can plan your day accordingly. Those are the kind of things that we're starting to see because of, not just 5G, but wireless connectivity in general, sort of giving access to all sorts of different applications that we maybe didn't really even think of just a few short years ago.
It's funny you mentioned a couple things there that I've experienced. The first one being you mentioned the parking meters, and it was actually at the Anchor in Telarus event, and I'm just constantly plugging Telarus at this point. But I drove to Detroit, and my family actually moved from Michigan around the Detroit suburb area back to New York where I live now when I was in like fourth grade. But I was in the suburb of Birmingham, which is funny because it's not England, but it was Birmingham. It's a very wealthy suburb. Like it's more advanced, so they're a little bit ahead of the curve. But they did have a IoT connected. You just scan it. There was no paper. There was no coins. I just scanned it via an app, and it had to be connected by something. And they had hundreds of them, so they weren't done by physical connectivity. They must have been an IoT device. So that was one instance. And then also I had prior to my role and my career, nearly a decade in tech, I worked in the service industry. I worked at a barbecue and fireplace center. So I was there covered in grease, fixing the barbecues, selling, barbecue islands, expensive stuff, and then doing the opposite with in the winter with fireplaces. But we used to have guys out on the road, and they didn't have the asset tracking. I'm actually talking to them about that tonight. But they also didn't have tablets. They weren't able to take on their phones, sending out quotes or getting signatures or sending photographs of the job completed and sending it back. So like these are the things that IoT is enabling. Now, I live in suburban Long Island. Our connectivity is pretty much fantastic for the most part. But there's a lot of areas where it isn't. And especially for those organizations that have services that cross-regional areas or cross-state lines or perhaps moving more into rural areas, mobility is really key to being able to get connection. You just don't have it any other way.
Yeah. But I think that the thinking is that you shouldn't be at a disadvantage when it comes to things like connectivity and your ability to participate in the world economy just because you don't live in New York City, for example, right? So I think that is what you're seeing is the demands from people in all kinds of parts of the world for access to these same benefits when it comes to connectivity as other places. And when you have that, it facilitates a lot more, a lot of other things that I think we're starting to see now. One thing I wanted to touch on, and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit as well, is cameras and physical security. I mean, a lot of people get concerned when they see what's happening with cameras and they think we're kind of in a big brother world, and certainly there is an element of that. Yeah. But when you think about safety and how much these have delivered in terms of a safer world, it really is tremendous. I mean, I live in Georgia, and unfortunately, just a few short months ago, there was a school shooting here. And as a result of that, there's been a lot of push within the school districts to bring these cameras in that do things like weapons detection and identifying people that should not be on campus and a lot of those kind of things that are creating a safer environment. We just sold another camera application to a church that had a fire a few years ago, and they wanted the ability going forward to know exactly how many people were in the building at all times. When there's an emergency, how many people have left the building so that how many people you're looking for, and with the cameras exactly where they are. So when firefighters go in there to get those people out, they don't have to just search mindlessly through the building. They know exactly where those people are. They can go and get them out, and they know exactly how many people they're looking for. So when you look at those kinds of things, I mean, not only are we delivering a more productive world, a more efficient world, but we're also delivering a safer and in some ways better world than we had in the.
Yeah, it's a tough thing being involved in tech, and you kind of get that moral conundrum, I do think about it more often than I would like, but I think ultimately, the horizon leans forward and progress it's not going to stop. So it's really about getting in front of people and helping them equip themselves the way that you were just describing, so they can sort of fight fire with fire, we'll say, and that's where AI comes in. There was another supplier, and I don't want to throw out too many plugs here, so I won't mention the supplier name, but I've seen their capabilities in terms of AI for physical security cameras, and in a scenario like one you just described, I know that there are advanced capabilities that don't exist on other IoT connected devices that don't have AI capabilities, but you can draw in geofencing. You can say, hey, when a man walks through wearing an orange shirt instead of a yellow shirt, flag him. If he walks through twice, flag him. If you see a mouse walk through here, flag him, and alert the authorities and automatically send the video footage to them. So I'm pretty sure with those capabilities, you're probably able to do firearms detection or something like that to proactively mitigate certain things, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the kind of thing we're talking about: weapons detection, firearms detection, gunshot detection. If there is a gunshot, knowing exactly where it is so that you can respond immediately to that area versus having to figure out where it happened and decipher a number of reports. We know one thing, that in those types of situations, usually panic ensues, and getting good and accurate information can be a challenge for first responders. So anything that we can do to provide that information that's unbiased, accurate, allows them to respond more efficiently and effectively to incidents that we need help.
Yeah, and it brings me to another aspect that I had intended to get to, and I wasn't sure how we're going to get to it. But anything that's new and great, there's always some sort of hesitancy and downside, right? And that's the exposure to risk that IoT inherently does bring up, which is there another endpoint, right? So it's another security vulnerability, and I want to ask you about that, as I know, I think one of the scenarios we discussed was the MGM Grand incident, which was a huge one. It was like an IoT, I think it was a fish tank sensor or something like that.
That was Caesar's Palace, but yeah, that's how they
Caesar.
got in and created an incident, was through an IoT device on a fish tank aquarium. The famous Target hack, right, was through the HVAC contractor. There were sensors that were unprotected on the network. I mean, I think that's a whole other conversation, and really kind of leads to the cybersecurity conversation. And I've got a colleague at Telarus, Jason Stein, who does an excellent job of kind of staying on top of that. And he and I have worked on a number of initiatives together as it pertains to that. The long and the short is you've got to look at those devices on your network like you look at any other device. And mobile phones is another one, right? People seem to think that just because it's a mobile device that it doesn't require the same type of protections that a laptop or a desktop would, for example. And of course, that is absolutely not the case, right? In fact, you let somebody bring their cellular phone to your corporate network and get access to whatever, you don't know what they've got. And so things like MDM, mobile device management, and those kind of things are very important to have. Securing IoT is a whole nother challenge, right? That's a whole nother aspect of it. The benefits of these things are always come with them some element of risk, as you said, and that is certainly something that needs to be considered as a part of any IoT strategy. Again, just like you would secure anything on your network, you really need to secure IoT as well. And it leads back to what I opened the conversation with, right? When you look at things like mobility and IoT, it really is just an extension of that network layer that we work with our customers on. So.
Yeah, and it's not like it's, well, I don't want to do IoT then, and it'd be another risk. It's no matter what you're doing, anything that's connected, any capability within your business is going to be internet connected these days. Whether it's on premise or it's out in the field, you're going to have to address the security aspect regardless. And I've had on several security experts recently. I had Bernard Breton from Adaptive. They were talking about their MyConnect. They were talking about they had the SASE. They had SD-WAN inherently has security features. I had on David McLeod of Coro. They were talking about they were able to do that. I didn't know that they were actually forming a partnership prior to having both of them on. So I'm hoping to get them on and do sort of a roundtable and see what that means for both of them. But there are ways to mitigate that. And I think that was one of the other advantages when I'm working with Telarus. When I brought up that IoT opportunity, right, I had familiarity with a few other IoT suppliers that I was aware of their pricing, and I didn't think it made sense, but I didn't dismiss that. I brought it to the team at Telarus, and I was recommended by Chad to a different supplier that ended up going to that made sense. And the reason why I'm saying that is because you can also bring that same scenario to the team, the engineering folks at Telarus, to address the security issues as well, to make sure that you're covering all your bases.
Yeah, no, and I think you raise a good point, right? If we're going to walk away from opportunities just because of security, I mean, be prepared to walk away from everything, right? Because it all needs to be secured and it all needs to be protected. I mean, that's just the reality of today's environment. And I think what we look for as tech advisors is a need that customers have, and in this case, right, protecting that environment. And they don't know how to do that in a lot of ways. And so we bring that expertise, and that is where we create opportunities for ourselves and for our businesses. And I think that's being the expert, somebody that they can lean on and look to help address those concerns is really how successful tech advisors do that.
Well, we have, I think we had about 10 minutes or so left, and I wanted to address something I saw that really lit me up and got me excited, because he's a man after my own heart. I saw on your LinkedIn that for about a period of 5 or 6 years there, you were a pack leader, a scout leader, the Boy Scouts, and I am deeply involved in bushcraft, and I will call myself a Boy Scouts dropout from my younger years, so probably wouldn't love to hear that. But I am now very heavily involved in the outdoors. I have a canvas hot tent with a wood stove, and this was the result of lifelong camping. But then during the pandemic lockdown, my wife and I sat and we watched every single season, every episode of Alone. And I started practicing in my backyard because there's nowhere else to go. And it was funny, after my first layoff, I needed time to reset, right? So I just took my tent and my pack out, my little Fall Raven pack, and here I did 4 nights camping out in Shenandoah in 20-degree weather, and I recorded a bunch of videos, and I was going to start a YouTube channel. I was going to do this stuff, and I was like, well, that's not going to make me enough money, so I had to go back. But anyway, I just wanted to hear about, your experience in that, what it means to you, because a lot of the folks I talk to have, giving back, they're involved with the community. So I want to hear what that means to you, and perhaps, if at all, how does it relate to your influences in your career?
Yeah, no, great question. Definitely not one I was expecting to talk about, but always happy to do so. So yeah, my boys, I've got 2 boys, and we did Cub Scouts with them. And so I was the pack leader with that for a number of years. And my one proceeded through, he didn't quite make Eagle, but he went through, and my other one, unfortunately, decided that he didn't want to stay with it. But it was a great experience. I mean, you get out there and like you said, you do things like camping and getting out into the wild and doing stuff. And when we work in the space we work, where, we've been talking today about everything being connected and everything being,
it's like polar opposite.
It's the exact opposite. And I think that's what's great when you get out there and totally unplug and totally get away from all of these elements of technology. And, certainly there's things we still have our cell phones for emergencies and stuff like that. But getting out of that, I think, can be really, really rewarding as well. Just unplugging, as they say, and scouts and camping and the outdoors are great ways to do that. As a result of my time in the Scouts, I'm very much a proponent of conservation and preserving the environment and those types of things. And so it's an important part of our life with my family growing up, and my family now that I have my own kids. So yeah, no, it's a great thing. And certainly for anybody who hasn't been outdoors yet for a while, do yourself a favor. Go grab a sleeping bag, find an open field, and just chill out and watch the stars for a bit. You'd be amazed at how refreshing and reinvigorating it can be.
Yeah, it is funny how they're complete polar opposites. And that's just like you said, this is how I recharge. So people are like, why do you go out there by yourself? I mean, first of all, I don't get that many opportunities to not be with my wife. And I now have a son, which his name is Emmett, which is my business is named after Emmettson. It's my son, Emmett. So nice. My time alone, I didn't go camping once this year. But it's also funny because I was a sustainability studies major in college, and I thought I was going to get involved in that. Unfortunately, a bunch of things happened, long story. not getting into it, but I think it also gives us a different perspective on technology, more of an objective perspective, because we don't just see it as, some dogmatic thing we have this other angle where we consider that, maybe the humanity of it. Maybe that's why we're kind of reflecting on it. But before we get all Aristotle about it, I want to bring it back to IoT. I covered, broadly speaking, the things I wanted to get into before we get into like deep rabbit holes and in the weeds about specific things. So I'm going to hand it over to you if there's anything that I missed that you think is super important, or any sort of closing monologue you want to get into.
Yeah, no, just really kind of two things I would say, and it kind of dovetails nicely with your, little break there into the outdoors and camping and stuff. It is this idea that, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. There are a million IoT solutions out there, right? There's a million things that you can do. You can track almost anything that a business needs to track or has a desire to track, but all doesn't always mean that you should. So when you have these conversations with your customers, I think you really want to make sure that before you proceed down a technical discussion and this idea of what we can do, let's look at the value of it, right? What does it mean to the business were we to do it? And I talk a lot about this at the Ascend, this idea of proof of value versus proof of concept. And I think in the IoT space, it is extremely important that there is value attributed to the information that we are going to get from our IoT solution, and something that the business can do with it. Does it have value? What are the returns for the business? i.e., does it make money or save money? And I think that's very important. What you said, unplugging, there's all these things that we can do. I think it's extremely important for us to keep that in mind, that we really want to make sure that there's value associated with the solutions that we are putting in place. And when we do that first, we start there, the technical things are things we put into place after the fact. They kind of fall in.
So we're back, and I've lost my background because we had my first experience with full technical failure. Maybe I should have been using my Infinite Wireless as a backup. I don't know if that was my internet or if it was an application error or something, but we are back on. Graeme, you were finishing a statement there. I don't know what I captured on it or what the last portion was.
Yeah, sure. So really what I was just talking about was the idea that, this idea of proof of value versus proof of concept. And just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. So we want to make sure that the value of any solution that we propose or put in front of a business is solid and is believable, right? That the company sees that value and it ties into those two things, making money and saving money, that businesses care about. So if we do a good job of that, if we outline the value of the solution, the technical stuff, the how, all that kind of stuff will fall into place as we put solutions in front. But first and foremost, we really need to make sure we're delivering value. And, again, just because we can do something doesn't mean that it's worth anything or that we should. And I think that's an important aspect of the IoT discussion in particular. When there's so many different applications you can do, you want to make sure that the ones you're proposing, the ones you're getting behind, are ones that actually have value to your clients. And that's going to enable you to be much more successful when you go to sell.
Very well said. Excellent point. And I think that is, again, testament to how I ended up in the situation where we are here talking about it. I'm really hoping that the last clip that I stopped on the recording before is actually saved. It did say 99% uploading, so hopefully we didn't just lose the whole podcast, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
So I'll stitch these two together, but
I can do it again. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I really hope not, because I think it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed having you on. I hope to do it again someday when there's enough to talk about, and we can dig deeper into a specific area, maybe some current events that come up. But
sounds good, man. No, I appreciate it. It was good. I enjoyed the conversation, and definitely would come back if you want me.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Graeme. Thank you.
You got it, buddy.